Hello, this is Mark from Sound Matters and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to cover top record storage mistakes that you commonly see, because record storage is really important if we want our records to stay in pristine condition for our entire lifetime and beyond. So I'm going to go through some of the most common mistakes that you often see that you should avoid if you want your records to stay in great condition. Maybe you want to pass them down to a family member in years to come, or maybe you just want to be able to enjoy them at their best for your entire lifetime. Whatever it may be, after this video, I'm going to hand it over to you to let me know which ones you think I missed off of this list in the comments. Let's get straight into it. Alright, so let's get the most obvious one out of the way straight away. This will be obvious to a lot of people watching this channel, but it may not be obvious to somebody who's new, and that is never store your records in horizontal piles, particularly not very big ones, because this can cause a lot of problems. You should always store your records vertically in a record cabinet or on a record shelf, a record cabinet preferably like the one behind me. So there's a good reason for this, and that is purely just, the sheer weight is the main one, because big stacks of records get heavy pretty quick, and those poor records down at the bottom have a lot of pressure on them. If you think about that label in the middle that protrudes out slightly, as you get down to the bottom, you're kind of creating this bowing effect, and you will eventually, if you leave your records there long enough, you will warp them into a sort of a bowl shape over time. It can cause all kinds of warping issues, but it does go beyond that as well. If there's any dirt or dust on those records, you're putting pressure down and pushing it into the grooves, potentially causing damage or scratching in the process. So it's definitely a big no-no. You want to keep them in those vertical piles, which, beyond the whole kind of just record care side of things, it simply just makes sense from a browsing your record collection perspective as well. Next on the list is exposure to extreme temperatures or even direct sunlight. So this should definitely be avoided, and the most obvious reason for that is, of course, that it will cause warping. So you should avoid storing your record collection in rooms where the temperature may fluctuate quite significantly. That's things like lofts, attics, basements, conservatories, particularly here in the UK. Those sorts of rooms should be avoided as much as possible. And of course, direct sunlight causes heat as well. So if they're sat against direct sunlight, not only will it fade the album covers, but potentially, if they're exposed for long enough, then you will cause warping there as well. The ideal temperature really for storing records is a consistent sort of 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or in centigrade, that's sort of around about 18 to 21 degrees. The other elephant in the room in terms of heat, of course, is direct sources of heat in the home, things like radiators, air vents, that side of things. They should never be right up against anything like that, because, naturally that's going to cause a problem. And before any of you say anything about the radiator that's there, by the way, that thing hardly gets turned on, and in any case, even if it was, it's actually a lot further away from those records than it looks on camera, and really does not cause a problem. But definitely be wary of any of those heat sources in your home, and try and keep some distance to make sure it doesn't cause any issues. Next on the list is storing records in high humidity environments. So depending on where you live, this may or may not be an issue for you. We want to keep those records nice and dry, because after all, we don't want any issues with things like mold or mildew on the records, or even the record jackets. Equally though, if you live in a very dry climate, then static can also become a real headache for you. So ideally we want a nice stable environment in terms of the humidity, somewhere between sort of 35 to 40% relative humidity is around about that sort of stable environment that we would ideally create. So if you're worried about this, then you could purchase a hydrometer to monitor the humidity around your record collection, and if you can afford it and you've got the space, it might even be worth investing into something like climate control via a dehumidifier or that kind of side of things as well. These things are obviously luxuries. If you have the space and you're able to do so, then you're going to be able to create that lovely, stable, ideal atmosphere for your record collection. Can I afford a dehumidifier or climate control and stuff like that? No, absolutely not. And I don't have the space for it either in a relatively modest house in England. But there is an alternative for people who are concerned about this and want to monitor things and have that little sort of peace of mind. You can get these cards from Vinyl Storage Solutions. I'll link them in the description of this video. I've got a video I did on these as well, which I'll link at the top corner of this video, but they contain desiccant cards and humidity indicators that you can insert and stick into your record sleeves to A, absorb any potential moisture that might be getting in there, and B, obviously give you an indicator based on color when the humidity might be getting too high. So those are a budget solution for, say, the most prized records in your collection to give you that little bit extra peace of mind. Next up is overpacking shelves with your records. Now this one is often overlooked as there's a bit of a tendency to overpack your shelves, to either cram your record collection in, or as a lot of people are maybe concerned about, leaning of the record. So you pack them all in tight and they stay nice and upright, but there are some issues there. Now, obviously, excessive leaning does cause a problem because the record at the bottom of the lean has a lot of pressure on it. Similar issue to the whole stacking horizontal, of course, but overpacking your records comes with its own issues as well. This makes it very difficult to get records in and out and can cause all kinds of problems in terms of scuffing, ring wear, and compression of your jackets, particularly those spines on things like, gatefolds and that side of things can cause issues with that over time. So you want to allow enough space for your records to breathe within the cabinet that you're storing in. This makes it easier to browse, much more pleasant for you to find your records, and it's kinder on them too. Moving on, and we're going to talk about poorly supported record shelving or record storage in general. We've all seen those horror stories of complete and utter disaster where a record shelf or cabinet collapses, taking some poor soul's record collection with it in the process. Record collections get heavy fast, so it's important to ensure that your chosen record shelving or cabinet is up to the job. I've seen some absolute horror stories with things like IKEA Kallax units where people have set them up the wrong orientation, where instead of it being supported by boards, it's just being supported by tiny little dowels, and then you see the horrible record avalanche that happens in the process. I've heard so many horror stories about this. So if you have an IKEA Kallax, make sure your records aren't just sitting on dowels. Make sure you've got that whole unit in the right orientation for the correct amount of strength, because there's nothing wrong with an IKEA Kallax, but they do have a right and a wrong way round that you need to set them up. So ensure that your chosen record storage can take the load. And if you have a particularly large record cabinet or a lot of shelving, it may be worth securing them to the wall for that extra peace of mind. This next one is definitely overlooked by new collectors, and it's sticking with the paper sleeves that came with your record. It's often overlooked because, after all, the record came with a sleeve. Why should I have to replace it? But the truth of the matter is that inner sleeves are one of the most critical elements of record storage, because it's the one thing that comes in direct contact with the record surface. Paper record sleeves can cause all kinds of issues with paper flakes on the record surface. They're not very soft on the record, so they can cause scuffing over time, and they don't help to mitigate against static either. So when you can, swap those sleeves, those basic sleeves, over for a good quality anti-static polyethylene sleeve. I'll put a link in the description to the sleeves that I recommend personally, so that you can get the best ones, or at least get the ones that I recommend. So I really do recommend making this switch, because it will be much kinder on your records over time. You'll mitigate against static. They'll be much softer on the record as well. Your records will really thank you. This is probably one of the most important fundamental elements of record storage on this list. Next up is skipping outer record sleeves. So if inner sleeves are often overlooked, I would say outer sleeves are practically neglected. And yes, it can feel really frustrating to spend your hard-earned money on sleeves instead of more records or even gear. But the fact of the matter is, if you want these records to stay in good condition, they really are important from the perspective of protecting the artwork and, not ending up with scuffs and corners that are all ruined and things like ring wear all over those record sleeves. If you want them to remain beautiful, then outer record sleeves are a must. The best outer record sleeves are made from polypropylene if you really want something to make the artwork pop, because they're crystal clear. Again, I'll put a link in the description of this video to the sleeves that I personally recommend. The last one on my list is storing records in thick PVC jackets. So traditionally, record collectors would store their collection in these very thick PVC jackets and not the polypropylene outer jackets that I just recommended in the last point. So actually HMV in the UK, if you go and buy a record, they still recommend these to you at the till when you're buying a record. And yes, I've had record collectors on this channel tell me that they've been using these sort of sleeves for years and never had an issue. But for every story that I've heard, there's so many other stories of where it's ended in disaster for their record collection. So what's the issue here? Well, the problem is PVC products can cause all kinds of contamination issues with your records. PVC sleeves, an oil-based product as well, if left under the wrong conditions, you get a phenomenon known as off-gassing, which can then contaminate your record with a kind of misting that is audible as hiss. It's infamously dubbed as the dreaded vinyl cancer, and there's nothing you can do to remove it once it happens. So under the wrong storage conditions, this has been known to happen. And while I haven't seen this happen on a particular record of mine, I forgot about a PVC sleeve that I left against a cast polypropylene sleeve, and the two did kind of have this off-gassing process happen to each other. They were stored, fortunately, away from my record collection where I kind of store old sleeves for kind of demonstration purposes, but I put this PVC one there, forgot about it. It was next to a polypropylene sleeve, and the polypropylene sleeve actually got contaminated with this misting and created kind of a rippling effect on the sleeve. I did a video on this. I'll try and link that in the top corner of this video as well, just to show you what I mean. Now, fortunately, this didn't affect my records, but I would definitely err on the side of caution, despite the fact that some people say they've never had an issue. But that's it from me, and now it's over to you. Let me know what you think I missed from this list down in the comments. And before you go, check out the description of this video where there's the discount codes that you can use at no extra cost to you. There's money off vinyl related gear so you can feed your hobby, and as I say, I get a small commission, but it has no bearing on the price for you. There's also my Patreon page. Check that out. There's bonus content there, all sorts of stuff going on. I appreciate if you choose to support me over there as well. If you're new to this channel, please do consider subscribing. I would love to have you on board. But until that next video, guys, keep spinning the records, keep enjoying the music, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.